I hate pests. Back when I was living at my landlord's place, we were constantly being infested with fungus gnats. And no matter what I could do, what I tried, somehow they just kept coming back and I couldn't get rid of them. It was like the night of the living dead for houseplant pests. And that was super annoying, and I don't want to deal with that again. So I decided to do some research and figure out why they kept coming back after you do everything that you can to get rid of them. I came out with 7 different reasons why your houseplant pests won't go away. So the first reason why your houseplant pests keep coming back is probably because you aren't addressing their full life cycle. So when we think about houseplant pests, there's really only a few reproductive stages that they go through. They start off as eggs, they eventually hatch into larvae, feed off of whatever nutrients they're feeding off of, then they hatch into adults where they fly around and reproduce. So what I imagine the reason a lot of people aren't successful with getting rid of their houseplant pests is because they're not addressing each one of those phases. Like they're only addressing when they're in the adult phases, when they're visible. For me, I tried to use yellow sticky traps to get rid of my fungus gnats, and that might have worked to get rid of some of the adults, but that did nothing to stop eggs and larvae from continuing the generations of fungus gnats in my landlord's plants. When you're dealing with pests, you really want to make sure that you're applying a solution that addresses all stages of life and not just what you see visibly. And that may be why, if you've tried getting rid of them, they might have been gone for a little bit after you've tried something, and then they seem to be coming back later. It's probably because you just got rid of the adults, but not any of the eggs or larvae. The second reason why your pesticides might not be effective is because you're not using the right mixture, or you're not following the instructions correctly. So I know for a lot of different pesticides, some of them instruct you to mix it with some soapy water, some of them ask you to dilute it a little bit, and some of them ask you to spray it all over the plants, on top of the leaves and under the leaves, and to do it, maybe even to do it at certain times of the day or certain times of the year. So if you're not following the instructions correctly, that's definitely not going to give you the most optimal results, because the instructions are essentially what the producers have tested to ensure that their product is the most effective. So if you want the best results, make sure you read the instructions thoroughly and not just not following any instructions. The third reason that I've seen come up is that your plants are already infested. And what I mean by that is that some pesticides or some treatments might only be preventative measures and not solutions for you if your plant is already infested with insects. I've heard this apply to neem oil. I've heard people say that neem oil is only a preventative measure. It might not work if your plant is already infested, and that is something that you should apply ahead of time or several times a year as a preventative measure, but it doesn't work as well when your plant is already swarming with insects. The reason I suspect that infestations are much more difficult to get rid of is because if your plant is infested with plants, the insects are all over your plant, and it's going to be hard to get a full coverage of your plant with whatever treatment you're using for it. And so you might miss a spot here or there, or maybe your insects might have traveled to another part of your house where they're growing secretly without you knowing. If you don't get rid of the complete population of insects, then after generations and generations of applying and reapplying this treatment, those insects could become more resistant to it. And so that treatment isn't going to be working anymore after a certain amount of time. And that could be why your pests keep coming back over and over again after using your treatment. The fourth reason that I've kind of talked about this already, but it's incomplete application of your treatment or whatever pesticide you're using. So if you don't get a complete coverage of your plant, if you're not using it properly by getting it all over your plant, every little crevice, and even soaking it into the soil in some cases, then it's not going to be a complete solution to your problem, because there's always going to be those stragglers that you've missed that are able to start from like 1 or 2 insects repopulate into thousands or millions of insects. So if you're not completely thorough, that's not going to solve your problems. And what might help with that is to keep on reapplying the solution even after you've seen the insects disappear for some time. Keep on applying the treatment if the instructions tell you to do that, so that you make sure that any little stragglers here and there that you might have missed will be caught. So let's say like every application you get 95% of the insects. Well, if you keep on applying it over and over again, that number is going to be compounded over and over, 95 times 95 times 95%. Eventually you're going to get like 99.9999%. 95% of those insects. And by the way, if you want to get your pesticides into your soil, you want to make sure to use soapy water to break up the surface tension of water so that it's more easily soaked into the soil. And in some cases, you might want to think about maybe going even deeper into the soil in case those insects are burrowing that deep. So you might want to dig up the soil a little bit, maybe even consider replacing it with brand new soil, and just making sure that your treatment is applied all over throughout the whole soil. The fifth reason is that you've identified the wrong type of insect. Pretty straightforward. If you can't identify what insect you have, if you try to use a wrong pesticide for that insect, it's probably not going to be as effective. So you really want to make sure you have the right insect down so that you can get the proper treatment for that insect to get the best results. And if you're not sure, one thing you can do is take some pictures of your plant, take some pictures of the insects. You can go on Reddit, there's a subreddit called Plant Clinic. Post a picture up there and there's a bunch of people who can take a look at what you have and give you their best guesses on what it might be. And that's going to be super helpful for you. The sixth reason that I've seen out there is that you haven't addressed the source. So this one's also pretty straightforward. If you haven't addressed the source of the issue, if you haven't addressed the root cause, your plant is not going to be fully rid of those insects because the source is going to keep on generating those insects even after you've applied treatment to your plant. So for example, if there's actually another plant that's being infested that you aren't aware of, treating another plant that you actually do notice those insects isn't going to solve the problem because those other insects are going to come migrate back to the other plant. At the same time, you might want to check your pets if you have any. Sometimes they might be carrying around some insects that you aren't aware of. You can also check around the house, any fabrics or anything like that. There might be some insects hiding around in there. Of course, this all depends on what type of insects you're dealing with. That might give you some ideas on where the source might be, but you can also think about if there's any insects coming from outside that might be making their way into your plants. Maybe there's like an infestation just outside of your house that you haven't seen before that's generating all these insects that make their way into your house and into your houseplants. The seventh is inconsistent application of your pesticide or treatment. So a lot of people think that when they're using a pesticide, it's just a one-time thing. They just spray their plant down and then it kills all the insects and you're done. So that's probably not the case. It's more likely that you're going to have to reapply your pesticide because it's very unlikely that you're going to get all of your insects in one go. It's possible, but there's just a greater risk that you're not going to get all of them. And if you're someone who just imagines it to be a one and done type of thing, that could be why you might see your plants keep on getting reinfested by these insects. So make sure you really read the instructions. They'll probably give you some hints as to how often you should reapply that pesticide or whatever treatment you're using. And if it doesn't, it's better to be safe than sorry. Just make sure to reapply that treatment every so often. But at the same time, you really want to be careful not to apply too much because that could possibly harm your plant. Just make sure to do your research on whatever pesticide you're using. There's a lot of info out there on how often you should be applying it. That's it for this video. If you liked it, if that informed you, if you learned something, then give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.